Hi, Paul from Paul's Passing Thoughts here, part one of a challenge to Protestant pastors. Your gospel is false, and what should you do about it? And in this first part, I'm gonna attempt to make it just really, really simple according to what Protestant Orthodoxy says. In the second part, we're going to get more into what the biblical definition is of the gospel of the new birth, which is the true gospel as opposed to the Protestant gospel. And then in the third part, we're going to talk and give counsel to Protestant pastors about where they go from here. Now, we know that you just can't walk into your church tomorrow and, radically turn everything upside down because of some new discovery or some new light bulb that's gone on in your head. But we'll address that in the third part. What instigated me to do this three-part series? And again, this first part, I'm just going to keep it really, really simple in regard to the thesis. All right. Um, this post right here that we're looking at is one of the more popular and most read posts of Paul's Passing Thoughts history. Okay, Joseph Prince and John Piper sitting in a tree kissing, and why John MacArthur is a hypocrite. All right, and in this article, as you can see here, I talk about a blogger being incredulous that some reformed blog uh, actually quoted Joseph Prince. All right. Well, that shouldn't surprise us at all, and we're going to go to a jewel of an article that I cite in this post to kind of launch from. Okay, so let's go to that post right there. There's the link. All right. So, again, one reason I want to do this three-part series is to document this post because it's a jewel. So, what is the premise of this post that this blog pastor here um, posted? What's the crux of his concern? Well, the crux of his concern is what's going on in Singapore and I guess Malaysia, and his concern that Joseph Prince is getting uh, all of the glory and credit for this message, the gospel being a message for the baptized as well, or the quote, saved unquote as well. And his argument is no, 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 Joseph Prince shouldn't be getting all of the recognition. This is the message of the authentic gospel of the Reformation from the very beginning. All right. Now, here's one of the points that I simply want to make in this first vid. All right, this first part. Even though, and this has come to bear in my mind because of the job that I have, and I deal with several residents on my hall who continually have TBN on the TV. And so while I'm in there taking care of them and doing my thing as a nurse's aide, TBN is on. All right. And as we know, TBN is predicated mostly on charismaticism and Pentecostalism, so on and so forth. Look, folks, it's all the same stuff, except for residual beliefs about the operation of the miraculous gifts in our day and God promising, this whole thing about seed faith and all this. Forget all of the residual issues. The gospel is fundamentally the same. Okay? And what is that? Well, we're going to look at this in very simple terms and why it is false. Fundamentally, the Protestant authentic gospel denies the new birth. All right? It denies the new birth. All right? And so what I am about to espouse here will be denied by many Protestants and pastors who I want to challenge. It'll be denied. Well, here's what's going on. Even though Protestants, who are more guilty of any religion in the world of not knowing what a Protestant is, not really knowing what the truth is about what they call themselves. I mean, at least Catholics own up to the fact that, yeah, our history is what it is. Popes of the past are what they are. But, irregardless of all that, they're God's anointed. And the Catholic Church is God's anointed. God's appointed authority on earth. The Mother Church, blah, blah, blah. At least they admit it. Okay? Protestantism claims to be this societal moral compass. Okay? Along with their progressive justification, which we'll address in a little more detail later. Okay? But the point I want to make is that even though Protestants will deny this intellectually, it's how they function. And why is it the way they function? Because it's Protestant tradition, and it's, as this article states, the heart of the Protestant gospel. What is it? And again, we're going to keep it simple and go into the little bit more of the meat of it later on. Okay, so the heart of the gospel. All right. We read here, the heart of the gospel is justification by faith alone. St. Paul wrote, "For in the gospel righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness is that by faith from first to last, just as it is risen." Stop right there. Of faith, by faith, okay, by faith, from first to last. They interpret that first to last as being from the beginning of your salvation to the last of your salvation. Or in other words, what John Calvin called twofold salvation or twofold grace. All right? Or double salvation or double grace. All right? Now listen. When I talk about John Calvin, forget about election. Forget about predestination. This is just another residual what would you call it, issue that's clouding, well, what this article calls the heart of the matter. Okay? So, reading on, and with the twisting of the verse, just as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Romans 1:17, and again, they interpret that the righteous shall live by faith. That's by faith alone in justification and sanctification, or faith alone, by faith alone in the Christian life. The very doctrine that James contends against in his letter to the Jews that were scattered about. But now a righteousness from God apart from the law has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. This righteousness from God comes through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. Now, in regard to how the authentic Protestant gospel interprets this verses of Scripture, there's some things to keep in mind. This whole righteousness from God apart from the law, all right? Let's first look at righteousness from God. Okay? Yeah, It's a righteousness from God because we're born of Him. Just because you're born of human parents and you have their DNA, okay, and that's what's at issue here. When you're really born again, righteousness is infused in you because you're literally spiritually born of God. And God's DNA, righteousness DNA, is in you. The way 1 John 3, chapter 3 puts that, is his seed is in you. So what the Reformed do with that is just because you have received righteousness that is of God as a gift, and like all gifts, once you accept it and once it's been given to you, you own it, right? The Reformed get all up into this. If you have a righteousness and you're truly righteous as a state of being, here it goes, watch for it. You have a righteousness of your own, okay, and not of God, all right? So they make the fact that you are in fact not just declared righteous, but literally righteous as a state of being. In other words, you aren't just declared righteous, you are righteous. God made you righteous through the new birth. That doesn't mean that your righteousness originated with God. All right? They make the issue of the righteousness originated of God and then being imputed to us through the new birth. They make that an issue now of it being your own righteousness that originated in you. That's the word games that they play here. Okay? So, um, secondly, secondly, let's look at this righteousness apart from the law. Okay, right here. All right, a righteousness from God apart from the law. All right, this is where the authentic Protestant gospel stumbles, because the Protestant gospel is not a righteousness apart from the law. Why? Because you hear it all the time. Jesus not only came to um, die for our sins and our sin imputed to Christ, he also came and kept the law perfectly so that his righteousness could be established before God and then imputed to us in our Christian life or in sanctification. So, we wouldn't have a righteousness of our own. The authentic Protestant gospel, i.e., St. Augustine, i.e., Martin Luther, i.e., John Calvin, i.e., Zwingli, i.e., Charles Spurgeon, so on and so forth, is this whole belief in the Protestant double imputation, and is in fact not a righteousness apart from the law, and they say it outright. And you say, and this is the crux of the matter, you say, yeah, but Paul, Jesus kept the law for us. So what? That's not a righteousness apart from the law. The elementary point that we're going to make here, which makes all Protestantism a house of cards that falls on this very elementary part, is it doesn't matter who keeps the law. Righteousness, biblical righteousness, is defined by the new birth, 1 John chapter 3, and not law. Apart from the law means literally apart from the law. Now you say, Paul, with all of the glorious Protestant scholarly, splendor over these 500 years, you're saying it all tumbles down and all falls on this little simple elementary fact? Well, absolutely. And if you listen carefully, as we're going to examine, they say outright, Their definition of Christians are people who are still sinners and they're not saved and therefore need the gospel to keep getting saved, and you can only get that gospel in the institutional church. Fundamentally, no different from Catholicism. And if you flip on TBN and listen long enough, it's the same fundamental gospel that Pentecostals and Charismatics teach in all stripes of Protestantism teach. And this is why I want to use this article, because you have, Joseph Prince being the Prince of Grace of Asia. So this guy writes this post. Hey, wait a minute here. Joseph Prince shouldn't get all the credit for this. This has been the Protestant message from the beginning. Well, amen to that. Now look, this is just simply stated. Message for the baptized too. This message is basic. Indeed it is. Many pastors feel it is only for the unsaved and therefore not needed anymore for the baptized. And see, that was when Protestants got away from their authentic gospel, like right after the American Revolution, because the idealism of the American Revolution and, the ideal of the freedom of man, which is, opposed to, free will and all of this stuff, and these ideas of man being created free and all that, got integrated into Puritanism, which was just a carryover from authentic Protestantism and Calvinism from Europe. For crying out loud, I think if I remember correctly, the very first Bible that hit the East Coast when the Pilgrims came over was none other than the Geneva Bible. I mean, if I'm remembering my history on that correctly. He goes on, there is a gospolution, gospolution going on that underlines the need for this heart to be preached to the baptized too. In other words, the so-called saved still need the gospel, okay? And Protestantism that came over from Europe, was transported over from Europe, was confused about that for, a couple hundred years or so. And with the new Calvinist movement that began in 1970, the true, authentic Protestant gospel is coming back. But keep this in mind, even in the 200 years where Americanism confused Protestantism, Protestants still functioned according to this gospel, although because they over that 200 years, they read the Bible for themselves from a historical grammatical view, and synergistic sanctification kind of got integrated in with Protestant monergism, and there was some confusion. But even in that past 200 years or so, before it started Protestants started to get back to this authentic gospel in 1970 via the neo-Calvinist, neo-Protestant, New Calvinism movement, whatever you want to call it. The Protestants always functioned according to this gospel. They just espoused it intellectually in a different way. All right, so he goes on. The baptized need to hear it over and over again. Well, yeah, because they're still lost and they need to perpetually revisit the same gospel that saved them to keep themselves saved, and you can only find that in the institutional church. Okay? And look, folks, Google, we must preach the gospel to ourselves every day. Google that. And why do you think, and look, this was an issue with me 6 months after I became a new Christian, some 30-some years ago. 6 months into getting involved with the institutional church, I'm like, why do we come to church week in, week and week out and hear the gospel, the gospel, the gospel? Aren't we already saved and should be moving on to other things? I mean, I was asking this in 1982. Okay, I had a problem with this in 1982. Okay, well, why was that going on? Why was that going on? Because the Protestants function according to this authentic gospel. All right, cooked and served in 100 different ways. And that's church. I don't care what stripe of Protestant you're talking about. You're talking about the baptized need to hear the gospel over and over again, cooked and served in 100 different ways from Old and New Testament texts. Okay? And pray tell, name me one church where this sentence right here doesn't describe most churches perfectly. Okay? All right? And note, if you don't do this, what it leads to. It keeps you from straying into the unmarked side trails that lead to condemnation. Any questions? All right? Any questions? Okay. So, the message of the Reformation. That's the guy's argument. The message of the Reformation. Some think that this message originated from Joseph Prince. It does not. It was the message of the Reformation, the message of Martin Luther and John Calvin, and it is still preached today and needs to be preached much more from all the pulpits in Singapore and Malaysia. R.C. Sproul is a Reformed theologian and John Piper is a pastor. They are respected by many, and I include myself among them. Watch them here teaching or preaching about the heart of the gospel. And indeed. So let's listen to R.C. Sproul first.
Now the question is, on what possible grounds could God ever say to you, you are just, when in fact you are not just? Again, how can an unjust person be justified? Well, when we look at imputation, the concept of imputation is found.
Now, we're going to get into, and actually, I may add another clip to this. This is just part one. This will be an introduction. I'm going to get into this. I'm going to get into this more in depth, I think. This is part one. Okay? But who's he talking to when, how can we be declared righteous when in fact we aren't? This is what I want to key in on. This is what authentic Protestantism is. As a Christian, you're not really righteous. You're only declared righteous. Now, all through the Old Testament, especially in the Psalms, we read plainly that the unrighteous will not dwell with God, period. Okay? And what we're going to look at is by what standard are we deemed unrighteous? Because we don't keep the law perfect. So you have a gospel that's predicated on perfect law keeping. And we're going to get into this in more detail. All right? But this is what, if you listen closely to these guys, they're basically saying to you that as a saint, you're still a sinner. In essence, you're still lost. And that's why you need to preach the gospel to yourself every day. And that's why you need to go to church and get more gospel every Sunday. Because even though you're declared saved, and that's how we need to put it in true context, okay? Let's not let Protestantism and Protestant orthodoxy nuance the words. Let's tweak the words, okay? Let's tweak the words, okay? let's switch the words around. So let me see here. Um, you're only declared saved, okay? Let's just take the words of R.C. Sproul here and put them in context, change the words a little bit in context of what he's saying. How can you be declared saved and not really be saved? That's what he's saying. Okay, so if you're only declared saved and not really saved, how can God call you saved when you're really not saved? Obviously, you continue to need what? The gospel. You need to go to church every Sunday and get more Jesus and keep getting more Jesus, and thereby, by getting more Jesus, and how often do you hear in the institutional church, nothing is about anything, everything is about Jesus? Well, why is that? Because you need more Jesus to keep yourself saved, and you can only get more Jesus when you're a member of good standing in the institutional church. Let's listen to what he's got here now on John Piper.
If you're visiting tonight and you're not a Christian, this is the center of Christianity. Listen, please listen very carefully. This is the center. This is different from all Islam, all Shintoism, all Buddhism.
No, it isn't. Full stop. That's a lie. All false religions of the world, including, and again, we're going to use our right words, okay? We're going to use our true words, okay? All false religions of the world, okay, are predicated on progressive salvation. I'm not even going to get into the big theological words like progressive justification, because Protestants, you start using them, they're big theology words, and they're just gone, they're just lost. But what he just said there is the big lie, okay? The big total Protestant rewriting of church history, okay? All false religions are predicated on salvation not being a finished work, okay? So that's just a big fat lie. All false religions of the world are predicated on progressive salvation.
All Hinduism, all secularism, all animism, nobody, no religion has this. A Son of God and something called justification by faith.
And
alone.
Sanctification as well.
So here we are in this courtroom, guilty, sinners, all of us, and the...
Got it? Here we are in a courtroom, guilty, sinners, all of us. Got it? All right. Now, you go to your Bible, and I challenge you to find anywhere in the Bible where the word sinner does not refer to the unregenerate. Well, Paul, are you saying that he is simply saying in broad daylight that Christians are still unregenerate? That's Protestantism. That's Protestantism. Let's continue.
Judge renders the verdict righteous. Now, how can that be? That's what Romans is about. How can that be?
Because, and we're going to get into the more in detail in the second part. Because the reason is because Protestantism is only an atonement of sorts of a Old Testament atonement, and they even call it atonement. Whether John MacArthur Jr. or whoever you talk about, these people are continually calling salvation atonement. Well, what's an atonement? And we're going to get more into this in the second part. An atonement is only a covering for sin. Real salvation via the new birth is not just a covering for sin, it is the ending of sin. It's the taking away of sin. Okay? Let's see what John Piper might have to say here a little bit further on.
Let me put it in 3 steps. The ground underneath this outrageous verdict. Let me put the ground in 3 steps. Step number 1, we trust Jesus alone as the ground and the basis of our justification. Not anything we do, not anything we are, and not anything God helps us to do.
Got it? Got it? Not anything we trust in Jesus alone, not anything that we are, so we aren't like Jesus. Okay? I mean, is he being plain enough for you? Okay? You know, Jesus isn't our big brother by new birth. Okay? We don't have any of our Father's righteous DNA in us. And Jesus doesn't even help us be who we are because of the weakness of the flesh. Okay, so if that isn't plain enough for you, here is, and listen, don't try this, oh, well, you know, that's John Piper, and he doesn't really represent true Protestantism because he's a new Calvinist. Hogwash. Okay? Say what you want about the new Calvinist, but as far as the authentic Protestant gospel, they are spot on. They are spot on. So if what we just heard isn't plain enough for you, let's go to a sermon that Piper preached on August 16th of 1998. How does the gospel save believers? And here's what he says in this, okay? We are asking the question, how does the gospel save believers? Not how does the gospel get people to be believers? Any questions? As a believer, you're still not saved. And you need to continue to be saved. And that salvation can only be found in the institutional church. Now, in the second part, we're going to look more at why this is a false gospel predicated on law and not true grace via the new birth. We'll look at that at the second part. Thank you for listening. Have a great God-honoring day, and go forward loving God and others aggressively with no fear of condemnation. Good day.